In 1925, the international community drafted the Geneva Protocol, establishing an explicit prohibition on the use of chemical and bacteriological methods of warfare. The Japanese military command viewed this global prohibition as a strategic confirmation. They reasoned that if the world's major powers felt compelled to outlaw biological weapons, then those weapons must be a highly effective military asset. Developing a viable biological arsenal presented a strict logistical barrier. To measure the precise lethality of pathogens like plague or anthrax, researchers needed to test them on living human subjects. Conducting lethal, large-scale human experimentation within the Japanese home islands was a non-starter. It would violate domestic law, invite immediate civilian backlash, and risk catastrophic accidental outbreaks in highly populated cities. The 1931 military occupation of Manchuria provided the geographic and legal loophole. This vast territory in northeast China offered a tightly controlled environment, isolated from international scrutiny, with a readily available captive population. Unit 731 was the result of this calculation. It was an institutional strategy to secure a legally unprotected populace, ensuring the military had the raw materials necessary to engineer a biological arsenal. The program began in 1932 as the Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory at the Military Medical School in Tokyo, before shifting field operations to the Zongma Fortress Experimentation Camp in Manchuria. By 1936, operations scaled up significantly. The military selected Pingfang, just south of the city of Harbin, to build an expansive new research headquarters. To local authorities and the public, this installation was officially designated the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Behind the cover story was a massive industrial complex covering 6 square kilometers. It housed more than 150 administrative and laboratory buildings and was anchored by central prison blocks capable of detaining hundreds of test subjects at a time. The operation was strictly compartmentalized into 8 distinct divisions. Division 1 was responsible for primary research, injecting captives with cholera, anthrax, and the bubonic plague. These findings linked directly to Division 4, which managed the mass production, cultivation, and storage of those specific biological agents. The entire apparatus was designed and commanded by Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a military physician who convinced the Army's high command to heavily subsidize his vision for biological warfare. By dividing the labor into discrete specialized departments, Ishii compartmentalized the ethical burden. Lethal human experimentation was integrated into a standardized bureaucratic assembly line. To fuel this assembly line, Unit 731 relied on the Kenpeitai, the military police of the Imperial Japanese Army, to act as its active procurement arm. They rounded up and delivered a steady supply of test subjects, feeding an estimated minimum of 600 new prisoners into the Pingfang complex every single year. Of those held captive, approximately 70% were Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. The remaining 30% were Russian and Korean civilians, political dissidents, captured partisans, and the mentally disabled. Upon intake, the administration stripped the captives of their identities. Names were recorded and then permanently replaced with a 3-digit number. The staff adopted the term Maruda, which translates to logs. Originally an internal joke referring to the facility's cover story as a lumber mill, the term became the official categorization for the prisoners. When a researcher asked how many logs had fallen that day, they were asking for a body count. The humans inside the cells were treated strictly as expendable raw materials to be processed and consumed by the facility. This linguistic dehumanization and psychological distancing was a mandatory prerequisite. It provided the framework that allowed researchers to execute the extreme medical procedures the program demanded. The efficiency of that processing system is evident in the specific outputs of the facility, starting with Division 4's biological mass production capabilities. This chart illustrates the sheer physical volume of pathogens the unit was capable of manufacturing. In a single month, Pingfang could yield up to 300 kilograms of plague bacteria and between 500 and 700 kilograms of anthrax. Because plague requires a delivery vector, the facility utilized approximately 4,500 individual incubators to breed massive populations of infected fleas. Researchers also conducted localized field tests. They injected food items, like melons, with typhoid bacteria. measured the microbial density, and fed them to subjects to observe transmission rates. Inside the laboratories, surgical protocols were equally systematic. Captives deliberately infected with various diseases were subjected to vivisection, often performed without any anesthesia. The objective was data preservation. Researchers extracted organs while the subject was still alive to study the specific effects of an infection, believing that post-mortem decomposition would compromise their findings. This graph maps survival duration against drastic drops in temperature based on frostbite protocols developed by Hisato Yoshimura. Subjects' limbs were submerged in sub-zero weather until frozen. Researchers tested rigidity by striking them with sticks, documenting necrosis during rapid thawing. In other wings, captives were sealed inside hypobaric chambers. The air pressure was slowly evacuated to simulate high-altitude conditions, and staff documented the body's physiological collapse, right up to the point of ocular rupture. The unit ran a venereal disease program, forcing infected prisoners into sexual acts to map the progression of untreated syphilis, including maternal-to-fetal transmission. These methodologies completely abandoned the therapeutic intent of medicine. Unit 731 treated human physiology as a machine to be dismantled, engineered solely to calculate and maximize lethality. By August 1945, the Japanese war effort was collapsing. As the Soviet Red Army began its invasion of Manchuria, Unit 731 recognized their geographic isolation was at an end. Ministries in Tokyo issued immediate orders. All operations at Pingfang were to cease, and every piece of incriminating evidence was to be destroyed. To ensure no witnesses survived to testify, the administration ordered the mass execution of the approximately 300 prisoners still held in the central blocks. Those who refused to consume water laced with potassium cyanide were locked in their cells and killed with poison gas. Throughout the lifespan of the Pingfang complex, thousands of men, women, and children were processed through its gates, and tragically, there are 0 documented survivors. Following the executions, Japanese troops carried out the physical destruction of the compound, placing explosives to collapse the laboratories and prison blocks into rubble. General Ishii issued his final directive to the remaining personnel. They were to disperse, return to Japan quietly, use cyanide if captured, and take the secret to their graves. In its final days, the facility's highly structured bureaucracy executed one last task. The entire industrial pipeline was instantly redirected from producing biological weapons to erasing its own existence. Following Japan's surrender, a global scramble began as the Allied powers worked to uncover the true scope of the Imperial Army's biological warfare program. The United States Occupation Authority in Japan, led by General Douglas MacArthur, quickly intercepted key personnel from the program. American intelligence officers recognized the data held immense value. They wanted a monopoly on decades of human experimentation records, ensuring the Soviet Union could not integrate that knowledge into their own weapons programs. To secure it, MacArthur's administration struck a secret deal. The physicians and commanders of Unit 731 were granted full amnesty from war crimes prosecution in exchange for exclusive access to their human experimentation records. General Shiro Ishii and his top researchers never faced a tribunal. Many quietly integrated into the Japanese medical establishment, founding pharmaceutical companies and holding prestigious academic positions. In contrast, during the 1949 Khabarovsk trials, the Soviet Union prosecuted 12 top Unit 731 leaders, handing down sentences up to 25 years in labor camps. To maintain their exclusive arrangement, the United States officially dismissed the trials, branding the documented confessions as communist propaganda. The evidence of Unit 731's atrocities was concealed, and the clinical data extracted from Pingfang was quietly absorbed into Western biological defense research. Shielded by this post-war arrangement, the Japanese government maintained an official silence on the operations for decades. It wasn't until a Tokyo District Court ruling in 2002 that Japan officially acknowledged the state's use of biological warfare against Chinese civilians. The history of Unit 731 exposes a strict geopolitical calculus. A state leveraged its isolated territory to execute systematic atrocities, and the global order pardoned the perpetrators, simply because the resulting data was deemed too strategically valuable